Troy, you recently had a post on social media where you said, "I didn't like myself very much when I was young. I was kind of afraid of life and didn't feel like I belonged in the room half of the time." Mm-hmm. Why were you afraid of life?
I had not quite adapted to people in general yet. I was listening to audio cassettes of the Jack Benny programs, and I knew who all the dead Hollywood stars were. And you can't talk about that with other kids who are 10. It doesn't work. There is no other you out there that you have common ground with. So I just was kind of settling into who I was and what I wanted. And it's like, well, like every kid, I want to be famous. Doing what? I have no idea. But it's not anything the other kids are concerned with. So there's just nowhere to go with that. And that continued pretty much into high school. I mean, even when I was doing plays and things like that, it just wasn't, I hadn't settled in yet. And it really wasn't my crowd. I was kind of this interloper who was just getting into these things that these people had been passionate about for a long time. So it was just unusual.
And in what state was this?
This was it started in Ohio and then eventually Florida. I didn't kind of really figure myself out until I went to college and realized I didn't want to be a cartoonist illustrator, which is what I thought I had wanted to be for probably 10 years. I had talked to every major figure in the comic books industry that you could get access to. And I thought, well, this is what I'm going to do. I can draw, so maybe I'll do this. And I don't think I've picked up a pen to do anything serious in probably almost 10 years.
This was at Full Sail?
Full Sail is where I actually put my last comic book out. That was where I said goodbye to that and decided that, film and TV was it for me.
So what changed? You said you didn't feel comfortable in a room. You were around theater kids or whatever that maybe had been, in the theater for years.
Skinny, good-looking guys with big heads of hair. And I was like, this is not, this is never going to work. I was too worried about types I could play and types I couldn't play. And, the good-looking guy is always the lead. And I was just like, what do I do? So I figured I'd jump Snake River Canyon and get into writing and just get out of trying to act or do comedy.
And did that change things for you? Did you feel comfortable then?
I guess I did. I mean, it wasn't really until I moved to Los Angeles that I started meeting people that I understood. And you could hang out, like most of my friends, sort of the big joke was most of my friends were guys that were 60, 70, 80 years old who had been very active in film and television since, as early as the 50s. One of my first real friends in Los Angeles, I joined a thing called the Caucus for Producers, Writers, and Directors. And the head of the caucus was a guy named Chuck Freeze, who is referred to as the godfather of the television movie. And he made something like 300 hours worth of TV movies. But he had started in the business in 1952, working for a company called Ziv that did the Cisco Kid and the Highwaymen. And I just kind of got into a groove with Chuck, and he would encourage me and he would say, "Don't freak out." He says, "I didn't start my own company until I was 42. And I'm like, well, I'm 30 now. I got to have a career first before I can start a company. So I am worried that what I can do in 10 years and 20 years and 30 years, because I'm always thinking in blocks of time.
What happens when you feel yourself reverting back to your younger self?
Oh, I hate it. I love who I am now. And I can say that very seriously. There are just people who have been put in my path that have brought me out. Allie Willis, who passed away in 2019, was a songwriter who wrote, or should I say co-wrote, September, Boogie Wonderland, the theme song to Friends, lots of other stuff. And she was this amazingly expressive person that her whole philosophy was about everything is a canvas for expressing yourself. And when you go out with her, she just had these crazy wild patterns and custom clothes and just had this enormous personality and put up with no BS from anybody. And that somehow soaked through to me. I had tried to create a reality TV show around her that everywhere I took it, somebody would say, "Well, who wants to watch a show about a 63-year-old female lead?" And I would just start fuming. I'd be like, Ozzy was in his late 50s when he did the Osbournes, and I thought he was pretty interesting. It's like, why are we going to draw the line with a 63-year-old woman? We pitched it one time after we had spent thousands of dollars chasing her up to Detroit with a camera person and shooting all this background stuff with her. And I got one meeting, and it didn't go badly. There just wasn't any follow-up. It's like a lot of things in Hollywood where you You bare your soul about this thing that means so much to you to an executive, and then there's nothing. There's not a no thanks. There's just like this weird sort of whistling of nada. And that's what we got. Still the most fascinating person that ever lived, as far as I care.
Why did she bring Troy out of Troy?
Because I didn't really know that that's who I was. I have a streak of outrageousness that's more of an invitation to other people to interact with me. People that I know, especially Ken Lee, who works with my publisher at MWP, are in love with the fact that I have these crazy patchwork jackets that a woman named Rachel Culp makes for me. She's Robert Culp's daughter, who was a fairly well-known actor in the 60s to the 80s. But it's just that thing that I like feeling like internally, I want to be a mobile party. I want you to have fun working with me. I don't want you to stress out. The places where I've worked, we would do things like in the middle of the day, we'll just shut it all down and just like a row of ducks, I'll take people to the dollar store. So it's like, go buy $5 worth of something that you think you would like. And just, creativity is about being able to reset once in a while as much as it is hammering at something. And we understand less and less about that as time goes on because reality television, so much of it is non-union. So there are no limits to what you can do to the people who are making your shows. You can work them 18 hours a day. You can make them work until 6 o'clock the next morning. And there's no meal penalty. There's no anything else. It's just completely dependent on the humanity of whoever's producing the show. And Allie was always a collaborator. So she cared about the people she worked with. On Facebook somewhere, Stephen Bray, who had been in a band called The Breakfast Club many years ago and collaborated with Allie to write The Color Purple for Broadway. Stephen Bray wrote this beautiful eulogy for her when she passed, and he said it was like being with somebody who was connected to a what-if machine by Bluetooth. Like she always had some idea of how to shake you out of stagnancy and to inspire you to get past whatever was blocking you. So she would throw these enormous parties. Sorry, this is going to be a whole interview about Allie Willis. But she's just the most amazing person. And I'm going to try very hard not to melt down in front of you. Like the way she inspired so many people, her work process, God, she loved process. And learning to love process is what saved me. It's less about you have to do all this. It's just sort of like, well, if I do it this way, we'll be able to do this. We'll save money. We'll put things out on time. Which is very appealing to employers in the end, but it's also a matter of like understanding how to get the most out of people without just saying, don't go home, you're going to eat dinner tonight in the office at 11 o'clock on your own dime because we're not going to bring in food for you. And I mean, and that's just what this industry largely has turned into because everybody's trying to figure out how to shave $3 billion off of an operation or something like that.
What's your message to others who may be afraid of life?
I would tell you to do, I won't say do everything I did, but the one thing that helped me was I was painfully shy. I didn't think I was as good as most people who were working. So I developed this sort of cartoon persona, which really went spiraling, into the stratosphere after I met Allie, but was based loosely on, I was always a big fan of Sandra Bernhard and Taylor Negron, and a lot of really good monologue humorists who have this sort of something they've created for themselves. If you've ever watched an interview with Oscar Levant, it's a completely self-generated version of themselves. If you can create a version of yourself that is not untrue, but you're sort of playing a character of confident you, then you don't have to feel personally responsible if it doesn't register very well. You're just like, oh well, that's the Tony Clifton version of me. And that worked for me. That got me out of feeling like I could fail at any time. It was just like, well, it's a version of me that's out there. It's not me. And eventually what happens is it's porous. And the real you is always, coming through that persona. Like people will figure out who you are. Like no one can ever tell when I'm angry. It's the worst thing. Like I'll be furious with someone. Like I'll give them 12 notes to do on a cut and come back 3 days later and watch the cut again and they've addressed nothing. And I just will start running in place and say, I'll be right back. I got to go outside for a second. And I'll literally run like a cartoon character out of the building down the stairs, do a lap around the block, maybe get a Snapple at the convenience store on the corner, and come back. I'm like, whoo, good. I just needed to get that out. Listen, I gave you 12 notes. None of them are done. Tell me why they're not done. As opposed to just screaming and yelling at people, which is what a lot of people enjoy in this business, is the power to scream and yell at people. I'm not a screamer. I'm not a yeller. I'm let's do something so completely absurd that both of us forget this just happened. And it all settles itself in the end.
So when you talk about persona, if we watch old versions of the Dick Cavett show, there were all these personas that would come on, and they were amazing. And I feel like we don't have that as much anymore.
The Dick Cavett show is a wonderful thing to watch just as a character study. Just the way people behave themselves. I mean, Lily Tomlin walking off on, who was it? Someone had said something about, a beautiful woman being, the most difficult thing to possess or whatever. And he's like, possess? It's not, women aren't yours or whatever. And she just, Larry's like, I can't sit next to this guy. And she got up and she walked off. And it's like, oh, who would do something so outrageous? And it's like, it's not outrageous. It's just her drawing a line for herself. Lily's fantastic, by the way. If you're looking for role models, excellent choice.
Lily Tomlin. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go back and try to look at that old tape of that.